Welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Ben Data, co-chair of DSW. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of Denver Startup Week. This community has been the catalyst for lots of change over the past decade, and this week we're coming together to celebrate the past and dream big for the future. We are able to bring Denver Startup Week to this community thanks to our 2021 sponsors. Thank you to our HQ and title sponsor, Amazon, and our title sponsors, whose leadership makes this week come to life. Capital One Cafe, Downtown Denver Partnership, Fluid Truck, Hotel Engine, and WeWork. And our track sponsors, who have made all of the great content you're hearing today possible. Founder Track, Kickstart, Growth Track, Friday Health Plans, Developer Track, Quizlet, Product Track, Palantir, Designer Track, Battery 621 in the Public Works, People Track, Exactly, and Spotlight event sponsor, Strat Labs. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to B-Side Fun, Colorado Public Radio, Comcast, Coors Brewing Company, Denver Pavilions, Entrepreneurship at the University of Denver, Gusto, JP Morgan Chase, Method, Moss Adams, Pine Insurance, Promontory Mortgage Path, Red Bull Basement, Southwest, Tattered Cover, and VF Venture Foundry. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Please say thank you to these companies as you enjoy our hybrid Denver Startup Week. And don't forget to use hashtag DenStartupWeek to share your experience and moments of inspiration on social media. Have a great week.
The Public Works is a Denver, Colorado-based design, fabrication, and multimedia marketing firm that allows your company to craft an authentic presence to your target audience. For the past 15 years, the Public Works media team has been telling stories with words, pictures, and films. Our unique approach to brand storytelling allows us to get strong reactions and results from our content. We work in experienced and nimble teams with our crew of producers, directors, and cinematographers that all have first-hand experience and international presence. We are fortunate to have amazing clients that allow us to get wherever we need to go with the right tools for the highest production value. Lots of people can take a pretty picture. Just look at Instagram. While we believe our images speak for themselves, what really sets us apart is our decades of experience, our network, and our ability to make shit happen when it counts. We love bringing unexpected partners together to create added value for everyone, and most of all, we love when we finish a job confident that we've not only executed, but elevated the end product, and we know that everyone involved enjoyed the process. Our company was founded on the idea that life is about learning and teaching through every experience. We apply a strict discipline of work hard, play hard, and make great fucking work. We amplify awesome. We surround ourselves with the best and feed off of infectious innovation, ideas, collaboration, and building long-term friendships and partnerships. Contact us anytime for a meeting at our office, golf course, or on the chairlift.
Hi everyone, welcome to Denver Startup Week. I'm Castle, the Designer Track Chair and member of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee. Thank you for joining us for the 10th anniversary of Denver Startup Week. At Denver Startup Week, we strive to make all of our sessions a space where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, or sexual orientation. A special thank you to our sponsors for their support in helping us keep DSW free and accessible for all, especially our Designer Track sponsor, Battery 621, and the Public Works. Thank you for joining us and have a great week.
Hey everyone, welcome to our Denver Startup Week panel. Today we're going to talk about how to design industry-leading experiences in a hypergrowth startup. My name is Nicole Chiantello. I'll be moderating. I'm a director of product at Pi Insurance. In today's discussion, we will talk about how to move fast, solve problems, and create world-class experiences in a startup environment where time and budgets are tight and resources are strapped. During our discussion today, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A chat. But without further ado, let's meet our panelists. Klew, do you want to kick off the introductions?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Klew still. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the lead UX designer at Velocity Global, and that's a company of between 250 and 500 tier people. So.
Awesome. Kevin.
Hey, my name is Kevin Philpott. I'm head of user experience at Pi Insurance. I was lucky enough to be employee number 1 at Pi, and I'm still here at one of the fastest growing insurtechs in the United States. I've been in UX for over a decade now. I think I'll hand it over to Tony.
Hi, my name is Tony Carabao. I'm a product design manager at FireEye, and I also am a strategic advisor at a couple of growth phase enterprise startups. I've been in UX going on, just about over a decade, just like with Kevin, former colleague of Kevin's as well. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Glad you guys could join us today. Our first question for the panel is, what is the day-to-day really like in the early stages of a hypergrowth startup? And how can companies empower their UX designers? I think, Kevin, do you want to start us off with that?
Absolutely. So day-to-day in an early startup, your UX, your product, you're ordering the meals for the investors that are coming in, you're working on an extremely small team with back end, front end. Hopefully you're lucky enough to have an SDET, and you're pulling in people from the business. You're probably at that point even working directly with the CEO, right? So it's super exciting stuff, right? It's a very small team. And if it's going well, it's the type of experience that you're probably going to remember forever, right? You're really building the plane while you're flying it. And as you're doing that, there are some things you can do to help make sure that you are empowering those UX folks in your organization, right? So one of the things you can do, whether you're an executive or if you're a CX or UX leader, is help get alignment on the direction of your initiatives so that they're crystal clear, so that if you're a UX designer and you're trying to do something, you are not trying to do it while you are building 2 different or 3 different or 4 different experiences. You really want to help them out by making sure that there's a clear goal and direction to what it is that you're trying to do in a short space of time, right? The other thing you can do is provide air cover, because it's a startup and stuff happens at a startup, right? So there might be a new requirement that comes in right at the end of when you're about to release your MVP prototype just before a giant demo, right? So sometimes you'll have to get into the mix as a leader and control that so that you're helping your UX designer as they go along achieve their goal, right? As one of my old mentors used to say to me, a guy by the name of Adam Speck out of Quicken Loans, he would help me fight off the work ninjas, right? So in addition to things like some of the things I just mentioned, it can also just be, no, you know what? This UX designer is not going to do that new project that just came out, right? Like they are going to do this thing because we need to get this out on time. And then the other obvious one, I think, is to minimize scope. So there's always scope creep. You're always trying to keep it down to what is the least we can get out there to get a good read on our product offering. And you don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good, right? So that is another key thing that you can do to help empower your UX designers in an early stage startup.
Awesome, thank you. Klew, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so I think the theme of that I was hearing from Kevin is like variety is the name of the game. And in my experience, that's definitely true. Like if you're the kind of person who wants to heads down drawing pictures for 40 hours a week, then the startup experience is not necessarily going to fit with what you're looking for, because when you're one of 4 or one of 5 or one of 1 in Kevin's experience, then you're doing QA, you're doing product, you are helping to find that MVP, you are helping to drop stories when you're hitting scope, you're helping the developers understand the business, maybe you're doing sales or pre-sales activities, you're demoing, you could be talking to a lot of different people about a lot of different things. And yeah, working with those C-level executives individually, it's super fun. I love the variety. But that is a huge aspect of being a UX designer at a startup. And I think that one of the problems that I've personally had coming into different teams as the first or the only UX designer in small groups is I don't have any contact with users, or maybe there aren't users because we're so new. So there's user-like people, user likes. And so what I always felt was the best way to empower me is to get me contact with those users or those user likes, because even though you might be wearing a lot of hats, you're not necessarily, implementing or in sales, you're not necessarily talking directly to users. And even if you're talking to people with purchase decision, those aren't necessarily your users or your user likes. So getting that contact is so important. Just being able to talk to them, establish kind of a rapport, and then, of course, ideally like pivoting that to prototype tests or observing their workflow. That is so important because that's oftentimes something a UX designer can't generate by themselves. They can't just be like, oh yes, my phone book of users who don't exist or whatever it is. So that's something I always felt was really important to empower me to do my job correctly in the beginning.
Awesome. So continuing on the topic of being a design team of one, where do you start when you're a design team of one?
Yeah, so start really small and really disciplined. Have your MVP mindset, or if you're lucky enough to have a product manager helping you doing that MVP, put that hat on and be like, what is my design MVP? You can start really small as long as you start with kind of a laser focus. A lot of times you'll hear in UX research, like the magic number for how many prototype tests you want to do, or how many discovery interviews you want to do is 5, and 5 is a great number. After 5, you do start getting a lot of repetition with previous exercises, but if you can only do 3, then do 3. 3 is an okay number. It's not great, but now you have 3 and you didn't have any before. That's going to help. That's really going to help grease the wheels in terms of getting from the concept to the execution phase, where you might be the only person doing that, right? You're the only person bridging that. So it's just really laser focused. Do a little bit of research instead of a ton. And I would also recommend doing no documentation whatsoever. Maybe that's a controversial take. I would be interested to hear my panelists' reactions to that, but that is not the place to start. And maybe it's not even the place to end if you ask me, but definitely don't waste your time with that in the beginning. Just get to prototyping. You can kind of help vet those prototypes with the rest of the team before they go. If you only have 3 people to test with, vet those prototypes first, get a pre-test or 2, run it with an intern, run it with somebody in sales that isn't as, like close to that. And that can help you kind of start to key some things in that you would be doing in user testing if you just don't have as many resources. You can do the same in design reviews or even in demos. If you're demoing to prospective purchasers or to other business units, taking their input with the UX cap, not taking necessarily everything literally, but kind of taking that as sort of an experience feedback can help fill those gaps with research.
Makes a lot of sense. Tony, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think all of that makes a ton of sense. Doing a little bit of research, like not a ton of research, but doing it frequently. So like keep hitting 2 or 3 people as often as you can. The schedule definitely matters quite a bit. I'll pull on the thread a little bit of documentation. I agree with Klew. Documentations can get super onerous, and you're trying to put in like a lot of documenting like red lines and things like that for the engineers. You want to be able to skip as much of that as you can. The way a way to do that through some documentation, though, is kind of like thinking ahead with documented reusable components and systems thinking. It's just like UX designers, as sort of a characteristic of our profession, we're empathetic, right? So if you're in a high growth startup and you're thinking already about the next designer that sort of comes after you in the way that you do things, not necessarily like in a ton of documentation, but in the way that you set up your files, even though I know all of our files turn into a complete, shit show at some point or the other. But as long as you're kind of thinking through some of those things, as well as sort of helping them sort of start up on the sort of design language and the design guidance for components. Basically, the more that you're kind of thinking about the next designer, the more you're kind of helping out your future self too. And so you can kind of use that natural empathy in your favor, if that makes sense.
Got it. And do you want to expand a little bit on what you mean by practicing systems thinking early?
Sure. Like, for example, a lot of times engineers want to use reusable components, or people always want to save time on things, but it helps to have a little bit of sort of documentation around when to use those components. Like, as if you don't have to put together a full-on design system, but when to use what components, what those things look like, so that you're not explaining what a drop-down is every time. Even though you can move really quickly, you want to eliminate the need to have pixel perfect mock-ups every time. It's a lot harder to have a conversation with somebody if you don't have a set vocabulary sort of in place. So as long as we have a shorthand between, when I say drop down, this is what I mean, I know I don't need to think about that. It builds a relationship with my UI developer.
Perfect. And Kevin, did you have any reactions to the no documentation comment?
Early stage, yeah, early stage, absolutely not, right? Like, when I say early stage, I mean, first couple of months, right? I think when you start to scale, when you get to a couple of hundred, then you start to need to have some of that documentation in place, because you have too many new people coming in that are like, what is this? And the group is not small enough through tribal knowledge to be able to pass that on. So I definitely agree, in the early days, there's no time for it. You're skipping it. You're going straight for getting the thing out the door.
So leading into our next question, for you to start off with, Kevin, what kind of design process do you need and when?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak to this from my experience at Pi, right? So in the early days, process, there was, you don't really have a process, right? Like, there's just a couple of people, either in a real room or a virtual room, just kind of getting through stuff, right? In the early days, we could do, I could produce mobile first wireframes, hand those over to our front end engineer, and we had an outstanding front end engineer, and they were able to take those and turn those like directly into workable products, right? That's not something that will work now with the company 4 years older, right? But we were able to do that out of the gate. Early on, you're trying to get stakeholder agreement. Sometimes when you're very early, there's so many decisions that are yet to be made in the organization. It's very important for you to try and play that role of like, okay, cool, I know stakeholder X over here wants this and stakeholder Y over here wants this, but we actually need to come to some sort of agreement to build a product, right? So there's a lot of that early on. One thing at Pi we did that I don't think I would ever not do again going forward was doing automated testing earlier. Right, we did that out of the gate. It can be hard to catch up on that later on. And as a UX designer, you do not want to be testing all 17,000 possible variations of what could go wrong if you can avoid it. So if you can get the resources for automated testing early, I think that really pays off. And the other thing I wouldn't skimp on in the very early days is analytics, right? You might not get all of your research done out of the gate, but at least if you have some sort of funnel that you're trying to optimize for, you can tell how that's working when you have analytics in place. So that's kind of how that's how we started off, very, very early days. Then you're kind of like, I'll say somewhere between 6 and 12 months in, right? And now you might have another person, you might have a little bit more breathing room. So now you might be able to do prototypes, right? Not just wires, right? Now you should be doing some amount of research. And to Klew's point, something is better than nothing, right? Before every major thing that you are building, right? and you're kind of building out a little bit more, right? And then you're getting into year 2, year 3. You've got all of that, plus now maybe you have a design kit, right? Because you're trying to be efficient with what you're building out, right? Now you might be lucky enough to have someone doing some copy review with you, right? You probably have Jira or some other tool to optimize your workflow, right? You might have more formal UAT processes or sign off with stakeholders. You might actually have an org structure at this point now with engineering, right? Maybe you have pods. Maybe you're getting into that kind of type of how should we organize ourselves. You've probably got agile ceremonies at this point, design reviews, but you're still at that point trying to do the absolute least possible process, right? Even in year 2 and 3, you're just trying to like, what is the least we need to do that this doesn't fall apart to get it out the door, right? And to move forward quickly and get the value out there for your customers. And then, we're in year 4 now. And I think now at year 4, you're getting into things like, we need a codified process. We need more communication because there's just so many people. Not everybody knows everything. So you need to have reference points for people. So you start getting into kind of some of the mature stuff that you see in some of the larger companies. And you can start talking to your other UX friends at that point without, you can probably look them directly in the eye in year 4, right? Like you're doing research every time and you have processes. So it's kind of like a nice thing as well too.
Very good. Tony, what are your thoughts?
Don't avoid your UX friends just because you're not doing it. We all feel like that. Just you need that you need that moral support. Yeah, no, I totally agree on the process part. I think that even at year 5, 10, larger companies, you're always fighting against that process creep. Anyway, and I think some of the things that even larger organizations do to try to reach back into that startup and growth phase mode is things like what Kevin mentioned, right? Like organizing teams around pods and around that real-time collaboration between, I should be talking to my UI engineer every day. If we're working on something, like we should have the same goal and we should be trying to target the same outcome, and we should be talking every day and trying to put that together. And that still continues to be true even at larger companies. It just gets harder to have that type of communication. One of the things that I see sort of growth phase firms struggle with, though, especially when they're kicking off UX, is getting in the right data. So like Kevin mentioned, right, investing in analytics or in some way to make sure that you're getting in the right raw data, so that you're not taking in bad information and making bad decisions off of bad information is definitely a big part. What I mean by that is giving your UX folks the room and the elbow room and the sort of backup to conduct the research that they're telling you that the company needs and that the organization needs, and kind of trusting your experts if that's what you've kind of hired them for, and as well as some of the investment on like tools and products to bring in analytics.
Awesome. So when you're facing down all of these things that you want to accomplish for your business, for your company, how do you decide what to prioritize? Klew, do you have any thoughts on that?
With a really good product manager.
Like that.
If I could choose one person to work with, it would not be another UX designer. It would be a good product manager. Invaluable. There are a lot of reasons for that. I think that if you can have somebody that is kind of, they're sheltering you in a bit. They're like kind of really focused on this element of what is MVP, what is priority, that frees you up to do the real design work and the real research work. You might still be part of a prioritization effort. We use a prioritization matrix that weights enhancement requests and bugs separately. It takes into account how many people have requested something, business impact, risk, all sorts of elements, and we weight these. And then any story that comes through, we score it. And that allows us to really compare apples to apples, which is really helpful, especially if you weight bugs and enhancements separately. You can then kind of prioritize them against one another, which is I'm 6 to 12 months out from launch is like a super, super good thing to be doing. And I think that effort, I've seen it be really successful just within a product team, but also, as the team grows, including QA, including other folks, implementation of people who are working directly with the users, depending on what your business model is, can be really, really helpful. If you do end up having to prioritize your own work, or if you're having to prioritize kind of design against design priorities, then I always go for the thing that's most reusable. What's the component that's going to be used down the line? What has to be done before XYZ? What is my pattern? Where am I establishing that? If you give yourself more lead time on that, you have a little bit more time to work out the kinks, and that'll pay huge dividends depending on how much that element is going to be reused or that pattern. But yeah, all things considered, I don't like to prioritize my own work. In fact, at my current job, I say a lot, they don't let me prioritize the work, because if I did, everything would be pretty and nothing works, which is like not true, because I'm a UX designer also, but it's kind of my tongue-in-cheek way of being like, the separation is good. Like, first of all, it's a nice way to escape the conversation of like, I don't know. I literally don't know. But it's also kind of lampshading, like, it's actually a really good thing to separate design and prioritization. And so like, we can worry about different domains and challenge each other too, right? So then product can challenge me. Actually, do you think we need this? Well, I thought we did. And product can be like, well, maybe we don't. And that's like such an important conversation to have. Or this feature came up in so many of these prototype tests, it wasn't even in scope. I think we need to consider it. And here's the reasons, and kind of pitch it to product. So there's like this really healthy challenging each other on what should be in, which is now that I've worked that way for years, I'm not going to go back. I know Kevin mentioned like in the early days of startup, like you might have to be product, but like, I hope not. I hope you can at least make someone else put a product hat on for a little bit to push you.
It's great to have a trusted partner to bounce things off. Kevin or Tony, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I'll chime in on it. I think that, if you don't have the choice, right, like if you don't have that good product manager that's going to kind of take all of that on for you, what I've seen is that product needs the UX perspective a lot in those conversations, so that you don't end up in a situation where you're prioritizing work that isn't going to build that incremental value release over release, or not even release over release, just like sprint over sprint or whatever, right? So that, because sometimes you get into situations where, we're going to spend, time building something, but it's not going to actually mean anything or be useful to the user, until the whole thing is kind of put together. So sometimes they need that sort of UX perspective in the room, right? Like, I agree with Klew in the sense, like, I don't want to be the person deciding, like, we can throw up a priority matrix and say, like, here's where we think is going to be the most important, but I don't want to be the decider of that. But it's helpful to have UX in the room during those conversations and sort of guiding some of those things, so that they have that perspective of the user perspective, and also some of the competitive perspective that we gain just kind of doing our day-to-day jobs.
Absolutely. I know I value that. So next question is, what type of designer do you look for, and do you hire in the early days? Do you want to start us off with that, Tony?
Sure. I always recommend folks to, I've had a few different types of conversations about this. And I know that especially in the startup time frame, a lot of the companies that I talk to are usually looking for somebody to make designs fast, so that their engineers can get to work and start building things. I think, you're looking for a senior person that can take on that immediate need while building out your research apparatus, which sounds like a really hefty thing to take on in startup land. But you need somebody that's going to, kind of have the experience and the gravitas to go in and build the confidence in both of your product organization, build the confidence in your sales organization, or whatever is kind of being built up around that, to get access to customers, to start building in the beginnings of your processes for research, et cetera. It's probably less of a problem in B2C, but in B2B, I do see a lot of, user research folks running into sort of that lack of trust on like, hey, how do I get access to customers? Because there's that sort of disproportionate relationship that one customer can have to your bottom line in an enterprise company, right? So you've got to be in a situation where the sales folks, the products folks, and the account managers and the executives all can trust you with that client. If that makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense for sure. Kevin, what would you add to that?
I'll ping off something Tony called out about. I think you were alluding to people skills, right? And I think that's super important for your early stage designer, right? They are going to have to do a lot more than when some of the rules have been established in the company, right? They're going to be a negotiator, right? They're going to also have to kind of figure out and understand the soft skills of like, what is it that this stakeholder really wants, even if they may not have communicated exactly as this is what I need, right? So you're trying to go in there and figure that out. Other stuff I think that's pretty important for early UX designers is this depends on your product, but unless you're kind of you're a very media focused product, if you're a product that people have to execute transactions in, right? You certainly want someone that is strong at interaction design, right? It's better to have someone who's strong in interaction design than contract out some of the visual design stuff than the other way around, right? For those types of products. So interaction design is something you probably want to make sure your first UX designer is strong at, right? I think also from like bouncing off of something Tony said is, I can't think of too many situations where I wouldn't be looking to hire at least a senior UX designer, right? There's so much there. You're not good. There's no time to ramp up, right? If you're that early on, right? So I think that's hiring at the right level is important. You can even go higher than that, and that wouldn't be a bad thing at all. Outsourcing as much as you can kind of goes with that hiring decision, right? So I kind of mentioned you can outsource high fidelity mockups if you have to. Outsourcing might also not just be a person, it might be things you buy, right? So maybe you buy a content management system or some of your components out of the gate so that you can focus on like the highest leverage interactions that you actually have to design. And the other thing I would say is, when you think about UX designers in the early stage of a startup, it's almost impossible to just imagine it in that silo of UX. It's really UX and your front-end engineer, right? And if you have a really good front-end engineer, that makes such a big difference to how you're going to be effective overall, right? You can, if you do have someone who's strong in interaction design, they're not great on, visual design. If you've got a front-end engineer who can help with that, you can make up the balance and get it out the door, right? Like a Pi, we had Aaron Holderman was the guy, right? And he saved my ass on many occasions as we were designing stuff and getting things out the door quickly in the early stages. And that helped us go to market way, way faster than we even thought we could, right? And we managed to launch, a workers' comp quote process, one of the first in the United States within like less than a year, which is, virtually unheard of with all the stuff you have to do for an insurance company. So that'd be my take.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So as a reminder for everyone on the phones, if you have any questions for our panelists, please post them into the chat. We have one there now that I'm going to jump to. So the question is, going back to year one, imagine you have a somewhat qualified designer, i.e. a UX bootcamp graduate with 6 months experience, and would like to establish a plan for the role of a UX designer. What advice do you have for a business owner to help plan the direction of that UXer's time?
I can take a punt at that. I mean, I think if, if you're the business owner or an executive at that point, you're hopefully looking at your North Star metric, right? What is the one business result you're really trying to drive, right? And in the early stages, it might be sales, right, or conversion rate or something to that effect. So projects that are in line with driving that measurable outcome, like UX designers should be as invested in getting to measurable outcomes as everyone else in the organization. So that's one way that you could help focus that person's time, right? And another way, depending on if you have product or not, is you could sit down with the UX designer, really think about what the roadmap looks like for that product, and use the roadmap as a way to kind of let that designer know, cool, this is what you're working on now. This is the next thing that's going to come up, because sometimes that can be super helpful for a designer, because you might be able to think ahead a little bit and design in a more kind of scalable way when you know what's coming down the road.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, it's a little bit more abstract, but like, when if I'm a year one, business, I'm probably looking for, again, a senior person that is a really great relationship builder and really knows the customer, or really knows their user from the prior job. If I don't have that person, right, and I have somebody who's newer and a more junior person, then it's important that I help them become that person, right? So get them a lot of face time and a lot of interaction with your customers, facilitate whatever they need to build those relationships with stakeholders in the company, and learn UX learn UX and the subject matter sort of through those exercises, as they kind of continue to be that great translator between your different parts of your company.
Awesome. Klew, anything from you on that one?
Yeah, I've done kind of two approaches in the past. I've done a roadmap approach where you say, hey, we have these 6 features that are going to accomplish these business goals for like this quarter, which is a really nice structured way to work. And I really like that. I've also done a kind of like a vision pitch type of way to work, which is more like, it's a lot more of an art than a science. It's sort of like for startups that are kind of in this place of like, maybe we have an alpha, we don't know what it's going to look and feel like, we don't know what the interactions are going to be like. I've done work where you basically craft and pitch a look and feel, almost a storyboard of what the UX is. I don't think that's an exercise for junior. I think more structure at 6 months of experience, more structure is better. To be really specific, one way that I've enjoyed working is like, I have 6 features in a quarter. Each phase of my design process, I chunk it out and say I'm going to spend 10 days on each phase. I spend 10 days on research, then I do ideation, prototyping and mocks, and then finalization, something really simple like that. And then you have 6 of these and you just offset them all by 5 days, so that that person knows, almost like imagine a Gantt chart, right? So that person knows kind of what their deliverables are during intervals, and you can be as tight or as loose with those intervals as kind of your culture is. But and then there's the variety of things to work on. When one is in prototyping, something else is in research, maybe something else is in finalization. But no matter what, you have these like visions of what that interval of time should be for.
Got it. Perfect. We have another question in the chat for Kevin specifically, but anyone else can weigh in. What are some of your preferred options for automated testing?
So my preferred option would be to talk to my friend Sam Williams and have him set up the automated testing for me. I think Selenium is a tool that we way back found to be valuable, but I will say straight up that you probably shouldn't be taking automated testing advice from me. What I will say is it's super important to make sure that your automated testers have a really strong understanding of the product and the experience, so the automated tests that actually get designed and executed hit the most critical or the most frequent use cases that you're looking to cover. Sorry if that didn't totally answer that question.
That was great. Tony or Klew, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, so in the spirit of variety at a startup, I was once an automated testing engineer while I was also a UX designer. And wrote a lot of code for that. And it's challenging. It's not easy. Automated testing is automated once you set it up. Like the first time you do it, it's manual. Like so, it's quite a challenge. But it's scope. Find the single loop that is the most common and do that loop and run it every night. So like it's a workout app. And all you need to do for loop one is like log in, watch a video, check a box, go to the menu, log out. And you run that loop every night. And then you add, and then you add. I kind of ate my own tail a little bit in automated testing by getting too specific to processes that we're going to change. So say you had a process where you can say yes or no. And so we test the yes path, we test the no path, and then 6 months later, we add a maybe path. And then you're like, maybe I shouldn't have got so specific on that loop before it was super mature. A year in, maybe just those core loops.
Got it. That's great advice. Did you have anything, Tony, or nothing to add?
I can't add anything to
Klew is the expert tester on this.
Okay, so I was the most junior of all juniors. It was great because it was like startups can be a real learning experience. And if you want to try something and you want to learn something, I want to commit code for the company. Cool. Here's automated testing. Like, and that's such a great thing about working in a startup is that element. But no, I would not consider myself an expert at maybe anything, but definitely that.
Very good. We have another question for you guys. How do the panelists recommend businesses in the angel/pre-seed stage handle this work? I'm a founder, and having teams as large as I feel like the panelists are describing isn't financially feasible. How can smaller companies do this kind of work while still being cognizant of cost, resources, and time? Also, what kind of benchmarks have the panelists seen in terms of expense in marketing versus UX, UI improvements?
I could take the first part of this question because regardless of how my answers may have sounded, I was like the only UX person at Pi for like well over a year, right? So literally just one resource. So you can do it in such a way that it's pretty cost effective. However, what I would say is it's still going to be tough. Like I wouldn't recommend in the angel or pre-seed stage kind of saying, hey, we want to keep costs down, let's do like a junior designer, for example, right? So I think there's a limit to how cost effective you can be there, but you can, like I said, if you have a good front-end engineer and a good UX designer, and that front-end engineer could be contract as well too. It doesn't necessarily even have to be someone you bring on full time. That's another way you can kind of really cut back on some of this. And also, we mentioned outsourcing, but it's not just the people, it can also be the systems, right? Can you buy something off of the shelf instead of designing it, right? Like you might only need in your angel or pre-seed stage a website, right? You might be able to get away with going and doing something from WordPress and just, having a designer like touch that up, right? So you try and get as creative as possible to kind of optimize that. So I can answer the first part of the question. What kind of benchmarks have the panelists seen in terms of expense in marketing versus UX, UI improvements? So what I'll say is, if I think about an acquisition funnel, right? And if you're doing significant spend for Google ads or whatever your platform is, Facebook ads, I'm not sure, right? if you have cheaped out on your UX designer, you may find that you're spending a lot of money on those ads and there's significant drop off in that funnel. So it's not exactly a metric, but that's what I would say. That's how I see marketing spend and UX often coming together in early stages, because UX can kind of be the limiter or the enhancer on your marketing spend, depending on how well they design that acquisition funnel.
So Kevin, is this where you would recommend investing in some analytics to kind of track the drop-offs?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way I would even know that stuff unless it's already in their page-by-page analytics, right? So that's absolutely on point.
Klew, you've been a team of one, haven't you? Do you have any more advice?
I've been a team of one. I've been the 4th/5th person hired in a startup. Hired on the same day as teammate number 4.5. Yeah, and in groups like that, kind of everyone is maybe indirectly involved in sales. And the way that I've experienced that is through like alpha products or limited time demos, where you might have a really big fish and they're demoing your product for 6 months. Maybe they helped fund the development. Maybe they have already seeded some, into the success of that product. And now that's not my area of expertise. But what I have done in the past, what I've been a part of is like a user ideation session for a new feature that is those users who are have purchased a demo. So bringing in those folks, whether or not they have direct purchase power, and doing a user ideation and like literally making it a little mini "we're here to listen to you" event where you actually do real design and you break up in teams and you pitch and you draw, and they have that experience. And then that is almost a pre-sales activity of like, this is how we grow and this is the way that we think, and we're just here to listen to you. That can help. That would be probably the extent of my experience going down that road.
Okay, awesome. Tony, anything else to add?
Just what I really like about what Klew just said is one of the best things that you can do is realize that you've got to get sort of other people, not just your UXer, involved in UX, right? As everyone at the early stage is kind of involved in sales, but everyone's also involved in the user experience and makes design decisions. Your engineers make design decisions, your product folks make design decisions. So what I've seen some companies do is try to blend some of those disciplines, bringing in UX people to also, like Klew had to do, deal with product and things like that. That has mixed results, but one of the things that I think is important is to have somebody with the UX discipline at the strategic level. At an early stage company, either if it's one of the founders, you just happen to be lucky enough that one of the founders just has that DNA or that experience, that's like great, or bringing in a strategic advisor or bringing in a lead UX person, but get that skill set involved in your decision making early, because that's companies are incredibly vulnerable to making bad customer and user experience assumptions, and that the product is vulnerable at the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's the dream, Tony. You're describing my dream. Like a CEO who's also a UX designer.
Yeah, that's what you want to kind of be at. I mean, nobody else except for the CEO usually at early stage companies, or some executives, usually has the same vantage point that a UX person does, right? Like day to day, UX people are looking at your competitors. They know all of your engineering limitations. They know your customers, your users. Like, who else has that perspective, right?
For sure. I would say if you work at an ultra small, if you're like less than 10 people and you're a UX designer, then like congratulations, because leadership recognizes the value, right. Already it's good.
That's awesome. So getting close to time here, I'm wondering if you guys mind wrapping up by sharing either a piece of advice for our audience or your top lesson learned. Kevin, do you want to maybe start us off?
Sure. I'll do lesson learned, or lessons learned, I guess I should say. So many of them in a startup. So many, right? Building incrementally, right? I think there's a lot of temptation to kind of build out kind of a complete product or a complete experience, right? I think in the early days of Pi, we built some things that were complete, but we could have built them incrementally, and we could have got some of the stuff out even faster, right? And we could have learned more on the way there. So I think, that's one thing to always, I mean, you're always trying to do that in UX and product, right? But like it's really important when you're a startup, because every single hour counts, right? And then the other thing I would say is that, sometimes hacks are okay, right? If you've got a product and maybe you could use it for a different type of customer, but it's not perfect, but it'll give you a sense of like what that market value is. And it might get you some really valuable feedback. If you can do it in a way that's not going to damage your brand, you should do it, because you can get some great learnings from that. So again, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Awesome. Thank you. So I have one more question coming in. Maybe we'll take that and then I'll circle back to Klew and Tony for their, okay. So do the panelists have any recommendations on cost-effective UX analytics tools?
Google Analytics could be free.
Great place to start, Google Analytics.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It depends on the product, but yeah, if it's Google Analytics is a great place to start.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right. Klew, lessons learned or advice?
The concept of like running into the spike in Agile Dev, that applies to UX design. My spike was always like finding the users, reaching out to people, calling and being like, I've never met you. Would you spend 20 minutes on a screen share with me? Or I've never met you back before COVID. Would you come into the office so I can watch you draw pictures? To me, that's the spike. So just like do it, or find someone to work with that will force you to do it, because it's so easy when you're a team of one and you're creating the UX value for the startup to be like, oh no, that like, I'll just stick to what I know really well. Like, I'll just stick to what I'm more comfortable with. I'll just test with the users I already have. Like, run into the spike. You have to do it. And then it'll get easier each time, but you have to do it.
Awesome. Thank you. And Tony, how about you?
I'll quickly reiterate something that I mentioned earlier, just because it's to me been a nice little hack or sort of cheat sheet on hiring, like how to find a good UX person, especially if you are a B2B or doing some kind of complex product or workflow. Always look for evidence of the candidate being a great relationship builder and interested in that. But the other sort of like litmus test that I have is, how well does that person know their user, and how well how detailed do they describe the user's, pain points and workflows from their previous role, right? If they know all the ins and outs and what it's like to be a healthcare, worker because they were doing health, UIs, then that's what I'm looking for, because that's what it's going to take to build, this new complex UI.
Makes sense. Glad you reiterated that. Well, I think we don't have any more questions and we're just about up on time. So I just wanted to take a minute to really thank Kevin, Klew, and Tony for their time and their thoughts here. It's been really great information that you guys have shared. Really appreciate you guys spending the time and sharing your wisdom with the audience. So thanks everyone. And yeah.
Thanks for being a great host. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, folks.
All right. Bye.